In September 2023, a smartphone went on sale in China with absolutely zero warning. No press conference, no keynote presentation. Just a phone quietly placed on store shelves called the Huawei Mate 60 Pro. When engineers at a research firm called Tech Insights finally got their hands on one and tore it apart, they found something that literally should not have existed. Hidden inside the phone was a 7-nanometer processor. That might just sound like technical jargon, but in the semiconductor industry, that chip was the equivalent of magic, because building a piece of silicon that advanced requires a highly specific machine. And the only company on Earth capable of building that machine had been strictly banned from selling it to China. To understand why that single chip triggered a massive panic across Western intelligence agencies, it is necessary to look at the unshakable assumption that has controlled the entire tech industry for a decade. Below 10 nanometers, physics becomes extremely unforgiving. You cannot just carve pathways into silicon with normal light. The wavelengths are simply too fat. You need extreme ultraviolet lithography, EUV. And only one company on the planet knows how to weaponize extreme ultraviolet light, a Dutch firm called ASML. ASML does not just build machines. They build the most complex devices ever engineered by human hands. To generate EUV light, an ASML machine drops a microscopic sphere of molten tin into a vacuum chamber. Then, a high-powered laser blasts that exact droplet of tin 50,000 times every single second. The resulting plasma explosion emits a flash of extreme ultraviolet light. That light is then bounced through a series of mirrors, but these are not normal mirrors. They are manufactured by a German company called Zeiss to a tolerance so impossibly precise that if you scaled one of those mirrors up to the size of planet Earth, the tallest mountain on its surface would be smaller than the width of a human hair. That is the level of precision required to build the modern world. Without ASML, there is no artificial intelligence revolution. There are no advanced fighter jets. There is no modern economy. No EUV means no advanced chips. That was not an opinion, that was an accepted law of physics. Since 2019, a tightening web of export controls and national security bans ensured China could not buy a single EUV machine. The technology Cold War was supposed to freeze them in place forever. So when that 7-nanometer processor suddenly showed up inside a Huawei phone, the question was not just how they did it. The question was whether the Western blockade had completely failed. The answer is something much darker and much more desperate than a simple technological breakthrough. The truth behind the Huawei chip is not magic. It is financial and physical brute force. Because China could not access extreme ultraviolet light, their top semiconductor manufacturer, SMIC, was forced to use older, deep ultraviolet machines, DUV. These machines were never designed to etch patterns this small, so SMIC used a technique called self-aligned quadruple patterning, SAQP. Think of it this way. Imagine trying to draw a razor-thin line, but you only have a massive, thick, permanent marker. You cannot just buy a finer pen. Instead, you draw the exact same stroke 4 different times, shifting your hand by a fraction of a millimeter each time. Eventually, the overlapping ink creates the illusion of a finer line. That is exactly what China did with silicon. They ran the wafers through the older machines multiple times to force the older technology to do something it was never designed to do. It is incredibly slow, it is massively expensive, and it leaves a terrifying margin for error at every single step. And the true cost of this brute force approach is something the Chinese government desperately wants to keep hidden. By 2025, reports began surfacing that SMIC was pushing this multi-patterning trick even further. Rumors claimed they were chasing a 5-nanometer node without using EUV. If true, that would mean leapfrogging past what Western analysts thought was possible, essentially rendering the ASML blockade completely useless. But this is where the underdog narrative collapses into a harsh mathematical reality. An analyst covering the semiconductor industry for TD Cowen recently exposed the truth behind this so-called breakthrough. SMIC's 5-nanometer node is reportedly stuck in pilot production, suffering from yields below 20%. In the semiconductor industry, a healthy manufacturing line needs to clear 80 or 90% just to be commercially viable. A 20% yield does not mean a technological victory. It means 4 out of every 5 chips coming off the assembly line are completely defective garbage. It is an economic slaughter. They are burning billions of dollars just to prove a point. And the desperation runs even deeper. Weeks after Huawei unveiled a new laptop, the MateBook Fold, rumors immediately spread that it was powered by a revolutionary new 5nm chip called the Kirin X90. But when Tech Insights tore the laptop apart, they found the exact same 7nm process from 2 years ago. The massive breakthrough was nothing but a marketing rebrand. If the story ended here, it would be a simple tale of a country failing to beat the blockade. But underneath the exaggerated headlines and the faked breakthroughs, China is quietly doing something that should terrify every Western intelligence agency. They are not just trying to squeeze more life out of old machines, they are secretly trying to build the impossible machine itself. In December 2025, Reuters buried a report that should have been the biggest tech story of the decade. Deep inside a laboratory in Shenzhen, a team operating in extreme secrecy successfully powered on a functional prototype of an EUV lithography machine. This team reportedly includes former ASML engineers, and they are attempting to rebuild a machine that requires a global supply chain completely from scratch while entirely cut off from the outside world. But the machine they built is heavily flawed. China does not have Zeiss to make their mirrors. They do not have decades of accumulated precision optics expertise. Reports describe the Shenzhen prototype as rudimentary. It occupies an entire factory floor. It is stitched together from reverse-engineered patents and salvaged spare parts. And the people building it know exactly how far behind they really are. Earlier this year, in March, the co-founder of SMIC and leaders from China's top chip equipment makers published a joint statement. It was not a victory lap. It was a massive public warning to their own government. They directly characterized China's domestic alternative to ASML as small, fragmented, and weak. Their exact words to the industry were to abandon illusions and prepare for struggle. So there are 2 completely separate races happening simultaneously. Can China brute force old machines to make modern chips? Barely, and at a devastating financial cost. Can China clone an ASML machine? They have a crude prototype, but it is years away from mass production. Just recently in May, Huawei dropped a bombshell that completely changed the entire conversation. Huawei's chip division chief stood on a stage and announced a roadmap to produce 1.4nm chips by 2031. But they are not using extreme ultraviolet light to do it. They are abandoning the traditional rules of chipmaking entirely. For 50 years, the industry has followed Moore's law, constantly shrinking transistors to fit more of them onto a flat piece of silicon. Huawei claims they have hit the physical limit of that approach. So they are replacing Moore's law with something they call the Tau scaling law. Instead of trying to carve smaller patterns, a technology they call logic folding physically stacks logic circuits in 3 dimensions. By stacking the layers vertically, the electrical signals do not have to travel as far. This drastically cuts down the delay between operations. Huawei claims this 3D stacking architecture will deliver a 55% jump in transistor density, giving them the exact same performance as a true 1.4nm chip, without ever needing an ASML machine to etch it. Did China defeat ASML? Absolutely not. Their brute force chips are defective, expensive, and desperate. Their cloned prototype is a rudimentary mess. But did the export controls freeze China in place? No. The blockade did exactly what blockades always do in the history of human conflict. It forced the trapped empire to invent completely new weapons. And every single day that goes by, the word impossible gets a little bit harder to say with a straight face.